Despite the work we have done in stabilizing the economy, Ghana is not immune from the shocks of global events. Recent events in the Middle East, which involve an exchange of missiles between Israel and Iran, have started to escalate crude oil prices dramatically. I've asked our Minister of Finance and Minister of Energy to keep a close eye on the development and model the possible impacts on our petroleum prices and prepare measures to protect the recent gains that we have made.
So I can assure the good people of Ghana that currently, as we speak, we have enough stock or reserve to last us beyond 2 months.
Beyond 2 months.
Yes. And with all efforts, we are confident that we wouldn't have any problem with supply disruptions at all. We have for petrol, that's almost over 200 million liters of petrol in the country. When you look at diesel, we have in excess of 150 million liters. So these are enough stock that can last the country for a long time.
On the back of that as well, the country, we have suspended the implementation of the new ESLA levy. What's the conversation around that? How soon is it going to be implemented?
As the implementing ministry, that is the Ministry of Finance and GRA, the tax collecting agency, have pointed out, government itself is monitoring global events and will respond in the next foreseeable days coming.
Welcome back to the AM show. This is the big story segment, and you heard there the President of the Republic of Ghana directing both finance, energy and finance ministers to model impact of this Iran-Israel war and find buffer solutions to absorb or give some shock absorbers to the consumer. We are about to have a conversation with a great panel this morning. I want to introduce everyone and then we'll get right into it. Of course, our data man, lead data analyst and researcher Isaac Kofi is here. We also speak to Alhaji Dr. Yusuf Suleimana. He's technical advisor, Minister of Energy, and technical lead for the GPP, the Phase 2 Implementation Committee. And we also speak to an energy strategist and former boss of TOR. We'll speak to Dr. Theo Champong. He's an economist and political risk analyst, and of course, our international relations expert will be joining us also, Nanaya Mureku. But first of all, I want us to understand where we came from, what the current situation looks like, and where we could be heading. So the data man, Isaac Kofi, will take us there. Kofi, over to you.
Well, Sweetie, now currently this is the most important trade route in the world right now, and that is the Strait of Hormuz, where a significant component of the oil we actually consume globally actually passes or uses this route just because of that long route around, Africa to other parts of the world, let's say Europe and then also the Americas. And this is the reason why this strait is so important. And if you see everybody talking about geopolitics and the tendency of this war affecting crude prices, because this part of the world you see, which is the Middle East, produces a significant component of the crude or the oil we consume every year. We understand the tensions here will actually affect, the trade routes that actually helps to transport some of the crude we find in the, the Middle East to other parts of the world. And especially if you look at countries like China and Japan that depends, heavily on crude coming from the Middle East. All of these are geopolitical factors that we will be analyzing. But the most important, country that we'll be focusing on is our own selves, Ghana. What is in for us? And why is the president even directing the finance minister and the energy minister to find solution? Why should, wars in other people's jurisdiction even affect us? This is simply because this is a country that spends about $400 million every month to import refined product or petroleum product to consume. It simply means that a significant component of the petroleum product we consume, we import them, and we spend huge sums of money to import these petroleum products. And so if there are supply restrictions and there is a problem with the local currency or the demand for the dollar goes up, it simply means that we're going to spend more to import some of these petroleum products. $400 million every month, and that is huge. And every government that comes to power, they look at this import bill and ask themselves how they can drive this down or maintain it and not allow some geopolitical factors increase this import bill that we saw on the smart war. Now, this is so important. We need to actually have a template to follow. And when this war started and prices of crude reached as high as $72 per barrel, people were asking, are we at panic level yet? Are we at the level of the Russia-Ukraine era? This seemed to be a different war, and looking at the numbers, we are currently not at panic level yet, but it's still important to talk about buffers. Look at what happened during the Russia-Ukraine war when prices went as high as $120 per barrel. We are simply not at that level yet, and yesterday the fear was that Brent crude reached almost $77 per barrel, and that was the biggest shock that went across the globe, and people were worried. But this morning, when there were talks around ceasefire, we've all seen Brent crude actually falling to somewhere $69 per barrel, and even crude itself in the 60 zones. And many have said that if there is going to be ceasefire and you do not attach any form of bigger risks to this war, you can actually see crude prices coming out. Why? Because already Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries are stepping in to actually meet the demand of the world. And so that's why we are not really seeing the impact so much. But definitely, it's good to talk about government targets for 2025 this year. We were estimating that if you look at the global tensions and other geopolitical factors, we were projecting some $74.7 dollars per barrel. And this is our projection as a country in the 2025 budget. And yesterday, when we saw that Brent crude has risen to $77, the fear was that we could reach $80 and possibly in the hundreds. And that could be a big blow to government, because what we know is that crude prices moves with the dollar. And so once you have crude prices becoming expensive, definitely the dollar index will also rise, and that will affect demand for dollars. And when countries like Ghana that depends a lot of dollars, you simply will see the local currency suffering, and we'll see some form of depreciation in there. Now, there is some sort of reply from OPEC, who are saying that, look, there is no need to panic because already they have this under control, and they have some of their members, actually Saudi Arabia, taking the painful pill to actually step in and meet up the demand. All of this telling you the reason why we've not seen prices rise as high as $100 per barrel. Also, others have also been reacting, but the most important thing to actually focus on is what happened. And our biggest fear is not to get to the point where we reach during the Russia-Ukraine war. We've seen some sort of stability with the exchange rate. Mind, we've been here before, somewhere 2021, between 2021 and early part of 2022, see how the cedi was stable against the dollar. It was around $1 to 6.50 pesos. But when there was that Russia-Ukraine tension, what you see is, the exchange rate rising from 6 cedis 50 pesos to as high as 14 cedis 20 pesos. And we all saw what it actually did to our economy. And as a result of that, we even had to go to an IMF program, do some painful debt restructuring and all of that. Many have said we possibly are not at the panic level yet because possibly the government has made us understand that if you look at the foreign exchange, in terms of the buffers we've built so far, we have enough local buffers to actually absorb some of this shock. And we know that usually the problem has always been demand and supply. And we know if you have the dollars, as for the fuel, you'll be able to buy. And government says they are rolling out the gold for, the gold board initiative, which they estimate could bring in over $1 billion every month. They've tightened the remittance space, which is also bringing in a lot. And as a result of this, there is supply of dollars for government to be able to give to BDCs to import. So there is no need to worry. But the big question is, with a country that has about 2 months of fuel storage, what is the buffer that we will need to, stand some of this shock that will be emanating from the Middle East? Currently, we know that yesterday the cedi didn't really start strong against the dollar. It was somewhere around 10 cedis, 31 pesos. But today we are seeing 10 cedis, 30 pesos. And many have said that because of the drop in the crude prices, now the cedi can gain some form of respite. Now, this for me is an important chart. If you look at our export of oil, how much we get from our oil export, and then our import bill when it comes to oil, it tells you why petroleum product is possibly one of the biggest burden on the country in terms of demand for Forex. Look at the blue line. This is our import bill when it comes to oil import. And the red line talks about our export so far. There was a point in our time where between 2019 and 2022, before we faced that big economic crisis, where our export was actually higher than our import. We were exporting more oil, we were getting more inflows from oil import than we were importing. Now, the picture changed when we had that crisis in 2022 and 2023, when now our import bill in terms of the petroleum product exceeds how much we get from export. This is a big, big risk, and the reason why we've seen the number of initiatives like the Gold for Oil deal, now the Gold Board and all of that, to mitigate the kind of pressure that petroleum product puts on our Forex. But, what is the summary of all of this? And why should you even care what is happening between Israel and Iran and possibly the US? It's simply because when you have crude prices rising, what happens is that demand for dollars will also rise because of the petrodollar system that we have. And then also you have prices at the pumps also rising. What it means is that transport fares might go up, and definitely you have inflation and energy sector crisis all following suit. And this is the reason why whatever happens in the petroleum space is so important that you cannot take it for granted. And as a result of this war, between Iran and Israel, and possibly America, is the reason why government has actually halted the implementation of that 1 cedi additional levy on petroleum product. And we all understand that the government made it a big point that they needed inflows from this tax handle to keep the power sector stable, especially to buy fuel. And so if this war rages on and government cannot implement the tax, it simply means that the energy sector shortfalls we pay will simply rise. Government will have to find money to actually bail out the energy sector. If it does not find the money through taxes, they will definitely go to the market to go and borrow. And many have said that government should not rush the international capital market. Currently, we have a B- with a stable outlook ratings. And if government finds itself in a situation where they cannot get money in the domestic space, especially through taxes, to fund the energy sector, we may be compelled to go to the international capital market maybe earlier than expected. So possibly that's a summary. Now let's talk about the shortfall, the windfall that the president was speaking about. Why? Because at the beginning of the year, this is where export price, especially diesel and petrol, how much we're paying. Blue line is petrol, and then also the red line is diesel. We're paying close to 16 cedis per liter. Now we understand that this has reduced per what we are monitoring from Goil station, somewhere around 12 cedis 88 pesos and 12 cedis 38 pesos. The savings we are talking about in terms of 3 cedis 11 pesos for petrol and somewhere 3 cedis 49 pesos for diesel. It simply means that the more we keep enjoying some of these windfall, the more it gives government, that kind of, reason to possibly go ahead to implement the 1 cedi levy. But when you have this war raging, it could be that the export price will actually go up and it will be difficult for government to actually implement this levy to save the energy sector. We also know that once the energy sector or once export prices are rising, you definitely will see what is going to happen in the transport sector. The final one that yesterday became a big conversation was how government was going to protect consumers. It spoke about the price stabilization and recovery levy. This is the levy that we all pay, and in situations like this, government is expected to use some of these levies to cushion consumers. over the years, from 2016 to 2024, government has been able to collect some 4.0 billion Ghana cedis from this levy. Amount utilized, according to the ESLA report, is close to 2.59 billion. The question is, the remaining gap of 1.44 billion, where did that money go? And in fact, this is the revenue, or there's a tax annual that is expected to cushion consumers in such troubling times. And what we are seeing is that even the inflows, 4 billion, it's not even close to how much government wants to get from that 1 cedi additional levy that they are imposing on export price. So the key question is, can that price stabilization and recovery levy actually save the country? And if there are talks around ceasefire and we see crude prices dropping, could this be the point where government could say that, well, we feel is the right time to start implementation of that additional 1 cedi levy on export price of fuel to save the energy sector, sweetie?
Thank you so much, Kofi Eje. And you have to stay with us. You're with us throughout the entire conversation. And so that's the, should I call it, the quantitative analysis or presentation of what the situation is right now. Let's get into the qualitative part. And I'm coming to you now, Dr. Yusuf Sulemana. So let's start with a bit of background in terms of the geopolitical oil risk. Have we seen similar incidents like this in the past that have caused disruptions in fuel prices?
Yeah, we did. Thank you very much, sweetie, for having me this morning. And that's how come a lot of people are sitting on tenterhooks. Because we've seen it before. The last two that I will just put here, somewhere in the 70s, we had the famous Israel-Arab War. And as at that time, the Arab world controls significant quantity of what the West produced, what the West consumed in terms of hydrocarbon product. So they came together and put an oil embargo. So if you go and look at the famous oil embargo, and that collapsed the market. It was one of the incidents in history that caused a market meltdown due to oil prices. Second one, fast forward, we had in the 80s Iran-Iraq war. That one they call it the usual tanker war. And that one is the one that is similar to what we have here. In this particular, conduit we call Strait of Hormuz. It's a critical conduit, it's a choke point, which is very critical. And if there's any disruption within that, it's going to cause a lot of problems within the hydrocarbon flow. So yes, these are the two incidents. But if you look at what is happening at this moment in time and comparing to what happened then, a lot of things have happened. A lot of things, we have a lot of changes. U.S., because of that happened, U.S. has gravitated to be the #1 oil producer and exporter. #1 oil producer and #1 oil consumer. So they wanted to be energy independent. Fortunately, thanks to shale patch fracking, they've done that since 2019. U.S. has been the #1 oil producer. Yes, in fact, they surpassed Saudi Arabia and Russia, who are following, the two countries following U.S. suit. So the reason why I said the politics have changed, and they've also gotten very close to the Gulf states. Hitherto, those who united together to put an oil embargo, we cannot have that again. It's going to be very difficult. So yes, fundamental things have changed, but we still have the premium of the potential closure of Strait of Hormuz on the horizon. And the high time, cool heads prevail, the better. Yes.
What I'm hearing is that crisis in the Middle East can instantly ripple across the global market, and it affects the average Ghanaian. And this is not the first time. So what, in terms of our capacity, Energy Ministry, Finance Ministry, Bank of Ghana, COMAC, and the rest, do you think that from that point, many years ago to this point, we have adequately prepared ourselves to be able to be self-reliant? Or if not, the panic thing you said, Isaac Kofi Eje, you mentioned that we are not yet at the Russia-Ukraine war panic stage. What is the difference between that point and where we are right now? Yeah,
so there's a little bit of fundamental difference between Russia and Ukraine and then this particular one. I see this particular one as more even destructive, than Russia and Ukraine one. And the reason being that what you've just enumerated. If you look at the Gulf state, the GCC states, there are about 6. We have Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. These are what we call the GCC states. And then we also have Iraq on one side. Then we have Iran on the other side. Iran is not GCC, but cumulatively, these players can contribute closer to 30%. We may not be importing directly from them, but it's a closed loop. Once we are able to knock out some oil barrels from the global space, let's say this particular conduit can control like 20%, a fifth of global oil global oil consumption. So if you're able to knock out a little bit of that, the cascading impact on the overall oil price will be dire. And that's how come place like Ghana, we are going to be impacted, especially like my good friend mentioned, African countries, and Ghana is not insulated from that. We are heavily import dependent, especially for petroleum products. So when it happens that way, we're going to be impacted. You ask a very good question. Are we prepared? I won't say fully, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. If you look at the projections that are ongoing with respect to our preparedness, that is very good. But going forward, what we need to do is that we will just have to have buffers. We have to robustly develop our energy infrastructure, i.e. bus, toll, our gas infrastructure and distance. Because these are the things that, that will serve as cushion. If you become energy reliant and these things come, I mean, there are those that will serve as temporary buffer. There are other things that we can do, technically in terms of linking the upstream and downstream to be able to cascade windfalls, which we are doing at the moment. Power, petroleum sector to cascade windfalls, which we are doing at the moment. If we do those things internally, when this particular incident unfolds, nobody will be insulated, from that. But of course, the magnitude of impact will vary depending on your preparedness. Okay. And if you do that, I think we'll be much, much more prepared to be able to withstand those incidences. Okay, I'll come back to you. Nanayo Mreku is an international relations expert, and he joins us in studio. Nanayo, last time we had a conversation, some 2-3 conclusions we drew have come to pass, that it's likely that President Trump will enter this Israel-Iran war. And now that has happened and Iran has responded, although they're saying it's choreographed just to get it out of their system, what does this mean to the Ghanaian? Is that we've seen the end of this in total? Is Iran going to strike again? You are the international relations expert. Help us understand where we are right now in the war.
Good morning to your viewers and good morning to yourself. I think that there is fatigue in the camps of both Israel, Iran, and US. Remember, President Trump did not want to entangle in these kind of wars in the first instance. So I'm pretty much convinced, if you look at the fact that, and I said it here in the previous engagements you've had, that the only person that Netanyahu Bibi is likely to listen to is President Donald Trump. And so when Trump has come out to say that he enthusiastically expects Bibi to agree to the ceasefire and enter into negotiation with Iran, I think that this is going to be a cessation of hostilities, at least for the time being. And until Iran probably escalates, and I don't think it is in its interest to do that, it has done the calculation to the extent that it even informed the Americans before they engage in this kind of attack in Qatar and Iran. Yeah, did he inform the Americans or informed Qatar because he were going to hit on their land? And, there was sovereignty things, so you have to inform them. And they, in turn, informed the Americans. Well, what was that? It's basically the same approach anyways. Because for a long time, Oman and Qatar have been the intermediary between Iran and US. So if Iran does not directly speak to US and it informs Qatar to inform US, it's just the same, come back to the same channel. But I think that by and large, it appears that this is going to be, in my opinion, I think that it is nobody's interest to escalate because the Iranian defense is obliterated, their conventional military tactics is compromised. They have lost a lot of missiles. They are not they are not bargaining from a place of power. So what has happened gives the Iranian regime the ability to save face and inspire confidence in their citizenry that they were not defenseless, they were able to defend themselves. But at the same time, once this has been achieved, what it means is that now let's get back to the negotiation table. So it's a win-win for the Iranian regime and it's a win-win for Donald Trump. I mean, he is going to claim victory knowing him for what has happened. Staying back from the crisis, it was in the interest of US to use Israel to neutralize Iran's nuclear capability. But when Trump realized that there was an opportunity for him to take the glory, they strike with the bunker bombers, and now claiming that they were the one that dealt the final blow to the whole war. And once again, they will say that it is because of the military might they demonstrated, the military muscle they demonstrated to the Iranians that compelled the Iranians to be calculated and then come back to the negotiation table. So I think that, as I said, it is nobody's interest to escalate the crisis now. And I would not be too far from saying that probably we are getting close. This is just a cessation of hostilities momentarily, but we are seeing who doesn't escalate the situation. Iran has come out to say it support that. Israel has come out to say it support the cessation of hostilities. So I think that we are nearing the end of what Trump calls the 12-day war.
Hopefully.
Historic development.
Yeah, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So let me go to Dr. Theo Champong now. He's an economist and political risk analyst. So the data man has told us where we are right now, Isaac Ofieje. The energy expert has also told us where we are now. And we've listened to the international relations expert, and he says that we are nearing the end. I want to hasten slowly and say we are nearing the end because you never know. It's a very fragile situation. But we heard the president say that the finance and energy ministers should model impact and find buffer solutions to absorb the consumer of these shocks. Help us reconcile how exposed we are right now as we speak on the back of all the angles of conversation that we've had so far. Dr. Theo Champong.
When I see my brother Yusuf and the rest of the people in there. And actually, I must thank Isaac for a very good job in presenting or doing the research and making our work quite easy to just speak to the issue. So kudos on that. I think a lot of the modeling work and the assessment is already been done. Like Yusuf was saying. In my view, and also the gentleman who's the international relations expert, in my view, the worst of the sort of crisis or war probably is over. And you can see that in terms of the market reaction and the expectation from both the futures market for oil and then also sort of other commodities in that regard. And we've been here before in not too recent history. So if you go back to 2020 when the Americans took out the Iranian general, was it Qasem Soleimani, we had similar tensions. We did see oil price rise briefly for a few days or some weeks, and then eventually there was some sort of backroom diplomacy to try and reduce or quieten things down. I think we are in a position as a country now where, in my view, we have better preparedness and more response to the crisis than we did, for example, during the pandemic and during the Russia-Ukraine war in that regard. You look at the budget numbers as the Isaac presented, and for 2025, the budget actually was prepared on the basis of $75 a barrel. We're expecting $79 a barrel in 2026 and beyond. And so far, if you look at our numbers on oil imports, we spend more importing oil than we do exporting oil. So last year, or close of play last year, we spent 4.6 billion on oil imports, and then we got 3.9 billion coming into our trade account. And even that 3.9 billion that we got, that was not all that belonged to us, right? Our share of that was just a little over 1 billion or so. So what the current hostilities and the cessation of the crisis, the ceasefire that we're hearing this morning really means is that if that is to continue, we're more or less to see a reversal or an extension rather of the status quo, in the sense that the budget numbers that were presented in March by the finance minister would not so much have been out of gear. Next month, the mid-year budget is going to be presented, and I'm sure the finance minister will give us further update as to sort of the responses that they've had to this. But fundamentally, we have enough reserves on the Forex side at the moment to be able to mitigate or safeguard that. We also have had, in terms of the inflationary dimension or the inflationary impact, the last reading came in at 18.4%. Even if you factored in the last 2 weeks of the conflict within that, I suspect that the April reading would not be too far off from that. We may be looking at the 19 or 19 point something, but certainly not going to the 20% mark as well. And then the point that Yusuf made, which is for me the really, really important point, what do we do to build more buffers going forward as a country. And we've spoken on this on several platforms over the last 10 or so years on the need to build buffers, on the need to invest in your energy infrastructure, on the need to ensure that, BOST is actually acting as a strategic player within the market and not just as an ordinary, BDC or bulk distribution company, on the need to ensure that we're actually also growing and diversifying the economy, right, away from the three primary commodity exports that we have been used to since independence. So you look at the numbers, on the export side is gold, cocoa, and oil. The three of them collectively account for over 80% of our export basket by value. And if you don't do something fundamentally or drastically about that, you're actually going to be in very, very serious trouble anytime that there's an external shock on the market.
Doc, let's stay here for a bit. I understand that gold is a safe haven for investors. So as we speak, you can't depend on oil, so you rather put your money in gold, which means that the demand is high right now. Just analyze this for me, and feel free to correct me where I may make a mistake. Now, if this crisis ceases, it means that it will reverse back to the stock market and oil. And that could also mean that the demand in gold supply or gold will reduce. What would that mean for us? Because you're saying that we have enough reserves, international reserves, and it's because of the demand for gold right now. So where do what happens to us if the crisis ceases?
So before even this crisis 2 weeks ago, and you look at the numbers and the forecast coming from a number of the investment banks, whatnot, we still don't expect gold prices to drastically drop. So when I say drastic, as in below $2,700, $800 an ounce for the next 6 months. And the point I was even making to tie in that earlier is that the world that we're in now is actually one where we're going to have more and more of these geopolitical uncertainties much more frequently. So whereas, a decade or so ago, every sort of 5 to 8 years, you were having a major crisis, we're actually now having major geopolitical crisis almost every 2 to 3 years, right? And that plays either ways. You see people then moving to safe haven assets like gold or to, other investment vehicles. But specifically for gold, even with the the cessation of the conflict, there are other geopolitical issues that are going on that is not necessarily as a result of what is happening in the Middle East. So we do still expect prices for gold to remain moderately high, and that should help us in terms of bolstering, our reserves. But the medium to long-term solution, of course, is not in gold. You have to diversify the economy.
Go ahead.
Of the implementation of that additional 1 cedi on the export price of fuel, many Ghanaians, although war is not a good thing, but felt like this was some sort of, safe breathing space for government not to implement that levy. Now that there are talks around ceasefire, and we've seen crude prices dropping, do you think that government could get back to the table and start, the implementation of that 1 cedi additional levy? Because the argument is that is expected to save the energy sector. The inflows there is expected to be used to buy fuel to power the thermal plants.
I think all options are on the table, and I think the finance minister, the energy minister, and the rest of the team would be analyzing and assessing the impact. I wouldn't be surprised if the 1 cedi levy comes back, in the coming weeks. If you look at even the general reaction of the citizenry to this, it's been largely sort of accommodating in some respects. So I probably think that, with where things are going now, with the potential escalation of the conflict, with markets baking that in, we may likely see the 1 cedi possibly, coming back. But that is, at the preserve of the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Energy. The point which we both agree to and which probably Yusuf can speak more about as well is that we have serious challenges within Ghana's energy sector, and we need to do something, about it. There are concerns as to how monies that have been collected in the past have been, utilized for with ESLA and whatnot. But I think once we have further assurance and we have safeguards around the one CD and what it will be used for, and the minister accounts to Ghanaians through Parliament, perhaps we'll be looking at some possible solution to addressing the crisis on the energy sector side for the country.
Dr. Suleiman, so let's come to you now. You said we should look within to find our solutions, and so I have to ask the question, could our local gas and oil production soften the blow? I know as we speak, TOR is in debt of about $518 million as we speak, but they're saying that they may be set to operation or reopen the operations in October. Is it enough what we are doing right now, and what more can we do?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so if you look at, I would say categorically that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And why I'm saying that is look at the posture and some of the steps that the administration is taking, then you'll be very much confident that we will have light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know whether you've heard of the big push, where a lot is going to go into infrastructure. And that's not all. You've also heard of the ABFA. That used to be segregated in piecemeal-wise, where a little bit of it will go here is petroleum revenue. Dr. Chiachimpo mentioned about judicious use of our petroleum revenue. We have the PRMA, but over the years, consistency in sticking to the dictates has been a challenge. Now, this administration is saying that they're going to channel 100% of it into infrastructure. And why that pleases me is my first point. What we need now is to just build our oil and gas infrastructure base. These are the things that will cushion us when this geopolitical dynamics hit us. And you mentioned TOR. TOR is one. Isaac mentioned about 350 to 400 million US dollars that we use to import. If we're able to do half of it, that would be a serious pressure relief on the local currency, undoubtedly.
But they have the capacity to give us, to reduce that cost by half?
Yes, we can even do, sure, if you revamp it, retool it, even increase the capacity, which is on the horizon. If you're able to do that successfully, we are going to do that. We're going to be able to do that. That's for the oil side. Let's come back to the gas side, the genesis of this one city. If you notice the shortfall because of the weaknesses within the infrastructure, which we are working robustly to build, especially within the distribution arm. We use substantial amount of money to import liquid-based fuel. This is very expensive. And this is not factored in the tariffs. That's unfortunate. That's one thing we must know. So I mentioned that this strategy that we are talking about, we want to look at the energy sector holistically, where we don't think that power sector is different from petroleum sector in a way, so that when there are windfalls in one areas, we should have a clear strategy to be able to cascade that into the other sectors. And I've always advocated that, which I think we are making headway, working at a formula to be able to use windfall from upstream to support the downstream, and then the vice versa. Remember we did that, if you look at a levy that some time ago when oil prices collapsed, when oil prices drop, you have a huge relief at the downstream side, and then the vice versa. So we introduced some levy. Now that is similar to this one city. If you notice what account for what the consumer pays at the pump, there are three. One, this levies and margin that we have, which is, we say we hold constant. The other one is the commodity price within the international scene, which over the years until the starting of this, recent pandemonium, it was very favorable. The oil price were in the 60s. Then the third component is the exchange rate. Fortunately, our city has performed tremendously well. I mean, we've enjoyed a bit of stability. And so these two, it has been to our favor. And that's how come even the premium of this, we haven't seen it that much. It could have crossed probably even to the pump price could have skyrocketed. But because we had that kind of relief a little bit. So what we were trying to do is, if, let's say, price at 10 cities, and then it's supposed to drop from 11 to 10. Then we just drop it from 11 to, from 17 to 10. We drop it from 17 to 11. That one city. It's not like an increase of any sort. it's just a reduction. And that helps in a way that we are struggling at the power sector.
Yeah.
If, assuming we were to use this liquid-based fuel and factor into the tariffs, I mean, the tariffs could have skyrocketed to more than 50%. So we have called for the fact that not only the power and the petroleum sector, the upstream and downstream, if we link them up seamlessly and efficiently, most of these shocks we're going to be able to go around them. The final thing is the gas, which I would call the game changer here. If you notice, we had Ghana gas that came about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have another gas. Imagine if you didn't have Ghana gas in this kind of equation, what would have happened? If Ghana gas is going down today, we're going to do a lot of calculations, manipulations to be able to safeguard us from going into a bit of load shedding. You understand that? Okay. So I think also building our gas infrastructure will help that. Okay. It will help build our energy security. And also it will kill two birds with one stone. It will also help increase our oil production. You know why? Because most of the reasons why our oil is declining, our production profile is declining, is because of gas offtake. That's one of the reasons, apart from the aging assets. So if you're able to extract the gas efficiently, I believe we'll be able to increase our oil production whilst we build our energy security holistically within the power sector and then the petroleum sector.
Trade at this point where it's not a war between either China and Iran or Israel. But definitely one thing you should know is that China is one of the biggest consumers of energy from the Middle East. So Mreku, looking at China, they are our biggest trade partners. If this, war continues and fuel prices become very expensive, it simply means that cost of production in China is likely to increase. What could that have in terms of the impact on inflation and even energy in our country right now?
Put it, China is one of Ghana's largest trading partners, and so if there is any kind of economic pushback that affects them, it also affects us. Yeah. I mean, for instance, the U.S., China trade war, for instance, we saw how that affected, Ghana's ability to trade with China and U.S., too. So I think that, and like you said, China also imports. If you look at Iran right now, China is probably one of the largest supplier of these crude oil. So by and large, if these things continue to happen and it affects the global chain, the global chain of supply, if it affects China, the little countries that also trade with China are also affected in so many ways. And that is why, for me, I think that when these kind of conflicts occur, countries in the global south they are better placed to play intermediary roles or mediatory roles than for us to entangle or to take position. Because at the end of the day, like they say, when two elephants fight, it's the ground that, suffers. So it's always in our interest to play this mediating role, this intermediary role, and see that the global architecture is peaceful, because when it is that way, it supports global trade, and it trickles down to these smaller economies, like Ghana. So I think it's in our interest to see that eventually this crisis comes to an end.
Talking about mediating crisis coming to an end, in the last hour we are hearing that some missiles have been launched into Israel. Iran is saying they didn't have anything to do with it, and it tells you how fragile the ceasefire is. Meanwhile, Ghana has closed its embassy in Tehran. So do these diplomatic actions tie into what we need to be doing to safeguard our economy?
Well, I think it's just interwoven. You can't separate one from the other. That's how global politics has become. Economics is at the fulcrum of whatever is happening. I mean, I'll come to your question, but look at the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. As much as the crisis has come to an end, Iran has not agreed to put an end to its nuclear capabilities. It is now that they are going to sit around the table to negotiate. So if Iran is uncertain that it cannot, because if you look at the non-proliferation treaty, there are 3 cardinal points in it. It talks about non-proliferation, it talks about disarmament, and it talks about the peaceful development of nuclear energy. Not to manufacture nuclear weapons, but countries have the right to go into nuclear arrangements for peaceful purposes. So Iran cannot be compelled to totally destroy its nuclear ambitions, especially if it's able to argue that it is going to use that for peaceful purposes. And so once you're unable to come to terms with them, and an agreement is not established, then they could go back to some of these things. It might not be a conventional warfare, but they could also they could decide to touch on these other soft spots like the Strait of Hormuz. They could do other things that once again affect the global economic, architecture. So I think that until we have a playing field as to what negotiations mean for the Israel-Iran crisis as far as nuclear capabilities are concerned, it is not really, a straightforward, issue. We just have to wait and see, what happens. But like I said, these are interwoven. One issue is likely to affect the other. And we know how critical the Strait of Hormuz is for oil production.
Do you think the ceasefire is artificial?
For me, I think it's organic. I think it's organic. Like I said, it is in nobody's interest to keep this crisis ongoing. Even Israel, regardless of its military might, is experiencing some fatigue, within the country because of its military depletion as far as resources are concerned. And Iran, like I said, is in no position of strength. Its proxies in the area are seriously compromised. U.S. is also the domestic politics of U.S. is not engaging, is not encouraging Donald Trump to continue this all-out war, especially, like I said, because of this midterm elections coming up in November. So he wants to disentangle U.S. from these global wars and concentrate on how to win elections coming in November. So I think that, for me, it is not artificial. I think it's organic, and we can only hope for the best.
So does the closure of the embassy affect Ghana's energy import relationship or access to strategic partnerships in the Gulf in any way?
So I don't think so. In my opinion, I don't think so, because this was, it was a response to what was happening in Tehran. But once like take Qatar, within the moment that Iran was seeking to strike Qatar closed up its airspace, redirected all airplanes coming to Qatar. But right after the hostilities and everything was normalized, the country has come back to normalcy. What it means is that once the cessation of hostilities in Iran and Tel Aviv, and things begin to take its rightful shape, most of these embassies will begin to work. And what it means is that the diplomatic connections Ghana has in the Middle East will begin to function normal. But it will take a number of days for us to see how events turn out. So I don't think it's going to affect, our diplomatic arrangement.
Kofi.
Well, sweetie, let me go to Dr. Stuart Champo. Doc, I mean, the president says he's spoken to the governor and the finance minister. They believe the cedi's natural level should be between 10 cedis and 12 cedis. Breku says he sees this ceasefire to be very organic. What does an organic ceasefire have on the strength of the cedi? Definitely, we've seen a stability instead of an appreciation within the last 7 or 14 days. A proper ceasefire, what would be the impact of the Ghanaian cedi that we are currently relying on as one of, the litmus paper to test whether the economy is really thriving at the moment?
Yeah, it would be, the economy would be as to the levels where things were before the war. So before this conflict, we had seen a major appreciation of the currency. The forecast and expectations is that it's going to probably end the year around the 11 cedi or so mark. So with this organic ceasefire, to borrow Meriku's words, and I fully align with that if you look at all of the players within this particular conflict, both on the Israel side, on the Iran side, which has been severely weakened, and then on the American side with the domestic politics, it's probably not in anybody's interest to really, continue escalating things, because the unintended consequences could actually be more dire for either side. So it means potentially a good thing for the Ghanaian economy. One, in the fact that, as we've discussed, you're not likely to see oil prices go further up. Number two, what that then means is that the potential impact on that on inflation, and especially on transport, that is partially mitigated. But I think number three, also the fact that, on the reserve side of the equation, currently we've got about 32 or so tons of gold worth around or in excess of 3 billion, something like that. That allows us to be in a much better position as a country from just the financial perspective or the economic perspective to be able to respond adequately to the impact of the crisis. So I am relatively bullish. I am I'm very hopeful that we likely would have seen the worst of the crisis over, and the Ghanaian economy would continue on the recovery path that it has already been on for the last, several months. And we've got a review of the IMF program as well that is coming up, and all of these factors will be taken into account. But let's be on the lookout for next month when the finance minister comes to give us the media update.
Thank you. We should be wrapping up. I'm told we have about 5 minutes or so to pop off. So, Dr. Yusuf Suleiman, let's talk about the domestic production buffers, or should I call them contingency tools? Yeah. Stabilization fund, Forex reserves, duty reliefs, and you might also add the gas processing plant phase 2. What does this all do to Ghana's energy security? Where do we stand going forward?
Yeah, so...
Does it boost your confidence, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
Oh, yes. So it's a very good one. If you look at when they call energy security, there are about 3-4, arms. We are talking about energy availability, energy dependability, energy affordability, and sometimes the quality of energy, So, and if you look at over the years, it's always been a challenge in a way, in the sense that if you look at the existing infrastructures, they are not able to live up to expectation in terms of their robustness, especially when we have external factors that come to play. And that's how come I mentioned that I'm relieved of the idea of the big push, and then the fact that we are investing so much into our energy infrastructure. Now, let me tell you what, for instance, the gas processing plant can do in a way. I just mentioned that annually we can spend over $1 billion in the equivalent of liquid base fuel importation. Now, two things. If assuming we have a refinery running, just a single component within the refinery can do our power generation. If you have a gas plant running, that can do two things. The gas plant, number one, will be able to help us in the power generation side. So what we call gas to power. Mm-hmm. So those kind of dynamics, then that would have meant that would have gravitating towards achieving what we call energy sufficiency. So I'll come back to the point that I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. If we are able to balance and make sure that we are focused in revitalizing our downstream infrastructure and even our upstream, and the upstream is even beautiful city. If you look at before this administration, we had stagnation in terms of what we call oil production. We had decline and we almost had inertia. But the players, I think they've gotten renewed confidence with a lot of players saying that they're going to invest back into Ghana. Chevron, Chevron, Shell, and Cosmos, and even our existing players. So if you have that also, and then the investment go as planned, that is going to rejuvenate our upstream sector. And so if you have these signs and signals within the horizon, I think it's supposed to give us a lot of confidence. Then I'll just be a little bit off to why this state of humus is a critical thing. This is a strait that borders between Oman and UAE on one side. Now, in a day, about 90 ships passes through this. Mm-hmm. And we are talking about 1 billion to 1.6 billion daily on equivalent of petroleum products. In a year, we are talking about 600 billion of petroleum products. So, and if anything should happen in terms of destruction, Ghana may not be important from most of these countries, but it's a closed loop. Wherever Ghana is importing from, this same petroleum product gets there and Ghana will import. So at the end of the day, the common variable is the crude oil prices. So that if there's destruction, definitely to skyrocket the crude oil prices. But like I agree with my friend, Miraku, and then Dr. Tia Chempo. I also believe that the premium of the conflict is almost vaporizing. And it's not in anybody's interest. And I believe that with ceasefire, we're going to achieve a lot of gains, especially within countries or within countries that are import dependent in terms of petroleum product, and Ghana is not an exception.
All right, thank you. Nana Mreku, I mean, feel free to reflect on that part. Of course, we've been hearing that it's not even about the production of oil when these major infrastructure places are hit, but it's about transport, export. But who won the war and how did we fare in it? Conclude for us.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win for both Israel and Iran. But of course, you know that Donald Trump will sit at the back of his table in the Oval Office and claim that he made everything possible. He lit the fire and then went around trying to control it with a as a firefighter. Yeah. But I think that Ghana has a lot of lessons to learn from this. Like Dr. Tio Champon says, every now and then, every 3 or 4 years, something happens as a shock to the country and to the global south. There was COVID, there was the Russo-Ukraine war, and now there is the Iran-Israel war. And like I said, we are almost at the receiving end of these kind of crisis. So going forward, we have to put in place measures because you cannot always behave like we are novice to these kind of conflicts, and not know what to do when they happen. So going forward, I think that it sums up everything that the respected pundits, experts on this morning show, have said. Okay. That we need to get ready for these kind of things as and when they happen. And I think that the country is doing very well. The administration is putting in place a lot of measures. Fitch has, upgraded Ghana's credit ratings.
They have.
It's really boosted the economy. It's inspired confidence. So we hope things normalize as we go on ahead.
So we didn't win the war. Isaac Ofieje, we're wrapping up, but final thoughts for us?
Well, prayer is that gold prices should stay stable. They shouldn't drop because this is an economy that is being moved from being backed by euro bonds to gold. And so our hope is that gold prices should stay stable for us to get maybe the benefits of the gold board initiative. Other than that, we possibly will find ourselves in a difficult situation.
Well, thank you all, gentlemen. I'm very lucky. I was the only lady in the mix. For joining us, we had Isaac Ofieje, our lead data and research analyst right here at Joy News. We also spoke to Alhaji Dr. Yusuf Suleimana, technical advisor, Ministry of Energy, and of course, the technical lead for the Gas Processing Plant Phase 2 Implementation Committee and a former boss for TOR and an energy strategist, of course. And we spoke to Dr. Theo Champong. He's an economist and political risk analyst. We spoke to him on Zoom. Thank you, Prof. And of course, our international relations expert, Nana Mreku. It's always a pleasure to host you. Folks, stay with us. When we return from the break, we'll be telling you about the scars of hooliganism on the AM show.